let's begin in talking about the uterine cycle. So the uterine cycle is this cycle series of phases that happen to the innermost lining of the uterus, the endometrium, and that the phases of the uterine cycle have to be coordinated with the phases of the ovarian cycle. And it's the, again, the endometrium that's being affected. We're going to see that there are basically 3 phases of the uterine cycle. And so it's a little different in that you might be thinking, wait, what? But it actually starts with the menstrual phase, which is when women have a period. Okay. And so that's the beginning, days 1 through 5. Typically a period or menstruation lasts for 5 days, but again, that can vary between individuals and within an individual. And basically what's happening here is that outermost layer, that stratum functionalis, is being shed because implantation did not happen. So there is no need to maintain that uterine lining. And so the way we're designed is that each month we redevelop a new inner lining. We develop the new stratum functionalis of the endometrium. Okay. So then after it's shed, then that leads us to the proliferative phase, which is days 6 through 14. Okay. Which basically is kind of cool, I think, that the endometrium actually contains a stem cell layer called the stratum basale. Hey, this kind of sounds familiar, like skin, right? Yeah. Okay, and so that divides to create a fresh new stratum functionalis. Okay, and that is caused by estrogen. Okay, and again, where's the estrogen coming from? It's coming from the ovaries, right? It's coming from the ovaries. Where specifically? It's coming from those follicular cells. It's coming from the follicular cells, right? That are around the developing egg, right? The developing follicles, right? Okay. All right, so then that leads us to the third phase where things are really bumping up here, the secretory phase, which is days 15 through 28. Okay, and here it's basically further building and maintaining is happening. Okay, we're going to see that there are these tubular glands. You can see in this graph, in this drawing that we're going to look at, that there are tubular glands, like this guy right here, okay, that make and secrete, and hence the name secretory, secrete mucus, okay, and other molecules, excuse me, that help to support implantation. Okay, and this is caused by both estrogen and progesterone. Okay, and where's the estrogen and progesterone coming from during this part of the whole cycle? It's coming from the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum. Okay. Okay, and I just absolutely love this graph because it builds upon this thing we've already been looking at. So we see we're looking at the phases of the ovarian cycle. We've already looked at this right before. And we see FSH and LH and their levels over this time frame, right? We've got day 0 to 28 happening, right? And then we see what's happening in the ovaries, right? The development of those oocytes and those follicles during the follicular phase, the ovulation, and then the formation of the corpus luteum. And then eventually that will turn into this white body that's dead, right? At the end. And then what's neat is now we're looking at the ovarian hormone levels. So we've got estrogens, we've got progesterone. We haven't talked about inhibin yet. I will talk about that. And then what's cool is that these hormones then are going to the endometrium of the uterus, right? And then we can see like what's happening to that endometrium and that stratum functionalis during the course of this cycle. And so here we see the phases of the uterine cycle, menses, or the period, right? And where that's being shed off, the destruction, the shedding of the stratum functionalis, and then proliferative, now we're rebuilding, and then secretory, rebuilt, we're building a little bit more, and now just kind of maintaining, and we see all these glands, right, that are making and secreting. We see even further development of blood vessels, right? And so the secretory phase is the mucus and other molecules being secreted to really maintain that. And again, why, right? We see estrogens going up to cause the stratum functionalis to be built up. And then we see both estrogen and progesterone going up, right? Because both of those hormones are being secreted by the corpus luteum, which then further helps to build and maintain the uterine lining, right? Now, then when this corpus luteum dies, we see both progesterone and estrogen going down. So then that causes this to not be maintained, and that's what triggers you to have your period, to then shed that off. Let's talk a little bit about inhibin. We see it's something that goes up, spikes a little bit, and then it really goes up during the secretory phase of the uterus or the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. What the heck is that? Inhibin is another hormone. Let's write this out. Inhibin is another hormone that is produced by the follicular cells. And what it does is it inhibits FSH and LH release. So does estrogen, right? So what does that mean? That means that basically our bodies are designed to be developing only one, getting one fully mature follicle formed at each time in each cycle. So we develop one mature follicle and ovulate one, which again, you can ovulate more than one, but our kind of standard design is to mature and ovulate just one, right? During one cycle. We wouldn't want to have like a whole stacking up of released oocytes stacked up on each other while the uterus already has an embryo there and is developing an embryo, right? And so this is a nice design to make sure that we're just kind of working on one at a time. And if that doesn't happen by day 28, then we hit the reset button and we start all the way over again. Okay, and so that's the design, is to be going through this cycle, get to one mature follicle with that secondary oocyte that's released, have the uterus ready for it. Oh, that didn't happen. Okay, rinse and repeat. Okay, shed off the uterine lining. Okay, now we're going to start developing some other follicles, right? We're going to take some primordial follicles and we're going to start developing them and see which one's going to be the golden ticket winner mature follicle at the end of that process that gets, you know, ruptures a secondary oocyte. Okay. And so this is just a picture showing, again, just the menstrual cycle by itself. And again, the menstrual cycle, the uterine cycle is all coordinated by the ovaries. It's all coordinated by those follicular cells in our ovaries. Okay. Okay. And then we've got the vagina. So the vagina, right, is the internal structure. Okay. It's an internal muscular tube, yeah, that accepts the penis during sex. And then it's the birth canal for delivery, right, of the fetus. Okay, so it's internal. So pet peeve here. I'm sorry, but it's a pet peeve of mine. People talking about their vaginas. No, if you're talking about something that's on the outside of your body, an external structure, then you're talking about your vulva. If you're talking about something internal tube, okay, then that is your vagina. But let's be clear here on what it is that you're actually talking about. The 3 layers of the vagina. This probably sounds super familiar to you. The most internal layer is the mucosal layer. So it is mucosa, so that means that there is mucus being secreted by specialized epithelial cells. And that we're going to see that there are circular folds within the mucosal layer. The mucosa is made up of stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, just to remind you. So it has to be kept moist to function properly. Our vagina also contains microbes, ladies, that produce an acidic environment to help fight off pathogenic microbes from colonizing into our reproductive tract. Pathogen means disease causing. Okay, and then unfortunately, as a byproduct, that acid also kills sperm cells. So that's why it makes sense that an ejaculate contains millions of sperm cells because many of them are going to get killed off. It's kind of like nature does this in other ways, right? Like think about how many, let's see here, how many jellyfish are produced or how many tadpoles are produced, right? Because of the fact that most of them get eaten pretty early on, there's only a select few that actually make it all the way to adulthood to be able to then reproduce. So same kind of thing here is that there's a high number of sperm cells being released in there because a lot of them don't make it to the, not even close to the goal line. All right. So, and then we've got the middle mucosa, muscularis layer. Okay, which is smooth muscle and contains an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer. And then lastly, there is an outer connective tissue layer, the adventitia, which is the dense irregular connective tissue, strength in all directions to strengthen and protect, right? Okay, then at the opening of the vagina, there's an incomplete diaphragm called the hymen. And so it is external, so it is part of the vulva. because it is external, right? Whereas the vagina is internal, okay? And there's a lot of diversity of hymen structures in the population, really unknown physiological role. It can obviously get broken from sex. It can get broken through other strenuous exercises and stretches and whatnot activities. And then the fornix, we kind of talked a little bit about the lips. You'll be learning about that in lab, about these kind of little lips kind of around where the cervix is protruding into the top part of the vagina. Okay, so then let's look at this a little bit. Here we can see the vagina and this opening between the labia. So we have the labia majora and the labia minora. So the opening here is the vestibule. Okay, so then this top opening here, that's the urethral opening. This kind of at the top where and the anterior side where the labia minora come together, that is the glans clitoris. So analogous to the glans penis in men. There's actually all this internal structure to the clitoris that we're going to look at briefly here. And then of course, this is kind of what the vagina looks like. See how it's has circular folds and it's a muscular tube. And then we see that the cervix kind of protrudes down and it creates this little lip that you can literally put your finger kind of behind it, and that's the fornix. Okay, and then we see all these pelvic floor muscles associated with it as well. Again, here's all the structures of the vulva. So these are all external, right? So if you're, again, talking about your female privates and it's external, then we say vulva, okay? The mons pubis is the fat kind of pad in the front at the pubic symphysis. Here, we have the glans clitoris, and the glans clitoris, just like the head glans of the penis, has a prepuce, so the prepuce of the clitoris, the kind of hood that covers over the glans clitoris. Labia majora, labia minora, the urethral opening, the vaginal opening that has the torn hymen. And again, kind of between the two labia minora is the vestibule. And then of course down below is the anus. Okay, we also have some extra tissue going on here. We have vestibular bulbs, which are basically erectile tissue that will engorge with blood during sexual stimulation, and then kind of flanking on the sides just above the vaginal opening. So here's the vaginal opening, and then we see kind of sort of on the sides here, right? Here's the vaginal opening, and then kind of flanking on the sides are these two openings of Bartholin's glands that secrete a lubricating fluid during sexual stimulation. And then here are the vestibular bulbs of erectile tissue, these kind of peach kind of bulbous structures here that are flanking on both sides that basically enlarge and kind of produce more friction around the male reproductive parts during sexual stimulation. And then what's neat is here you can see all the internal portions of the clitoris. So what we see on the outside is the glans clitoris and then the prepuce, but then there's all this corpus cavernosa tissue, just like the corpus cavernosum in the male penis. It's this very analogous thing that we see going on. And then we have these little crura or legs that kind of flank out internally, kind of laterally to the vestibule bulbs. Okay. And so, yeah, the clitoris is actually comes from the Greek word for touching and stimulating pleasure. And here we can see this is kind of a look at the clitoris is shown here in yellow. in this picture. Okay, and it shows its relationship to the uterus and to the bladder. And so we can see how it has these legs and this structure here, this body that kind of surrounds the vagina, and then these legs kind of fan out laterally. Do you see that, how that is? And then it's the glans clitoris, that's the external part that we actually see and is stimulated. And literally, I'm telling you that the clitoris is analogous to the penis. Oh, I still laugh. I can't help it. Okay, because this is hilarious. All right. So here's the glans penis, which is analogous to the glans clitoris. And then here we see the corpus cavernosa. Guess what, ladies have corpus cavernosa of their clitoris. Then there are legs. There are crura of the penis. Yep, same thing, crura of the clitoris. And so the guys have the bulb of the penis, and we have those vestibular bulbs basically sitting in between here, right? So the design is strikingly analogous here, right? How about that? And in fact, all penises actually started as a clitoris developmentally. So during pregnancy, the fetus actually first develops a clitoris. And then when it's determined to be biologically male or female, then it grows into a penis if it's deemed biologically male. Okay. So all penises actually start as a clitoris in fetal development. Yeah. So how about that? Okay. And then again, here's some other shots to show you how guys have the bulb of the penis or the root of the penis. Well, we have our own bulbs. We have our vestibular bulbs that are kind of in that vestibule region between the labia minora, right? That are sitting there. Okay. All right, then lastly, we have mammary glands as part of our reproductive system to produce breast milk. There are anywhere from 15 to 25 different glands in each breast, and that we see that they have all these ducts that then come out through the nipple. And so this is basically kind of like an apocrine gland, right? It's ducting out. And the development of milk production secretion is regulated by hormones that you'll learn in physiology. And we can see all these suspensory ligaments that attach to the pectoralis major muscle to keep all of these glands and ducts in place. Okay, guys, this is a nice little table just to summarize the hormones and their sources and functions. And that is it for us, you guys. All right. We'll see you. Hope you enjoyed that. Take care.